the Baen Free Radio Hour.
Hello and welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour. This week we bring you the first half of Sean Hazlett's interview of David Weber and the contributors Marisa Wolf, Jacob Holo, Dan Butler, Thomas Pope, and Jane Lindskold on their work on Challenges, the latest anthology from David Weber's Honorverse. And later, we continue with the serialization of One Jump Ahead by Mark L. Van Name, Part 33.
Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour podcast. I'm Sean Hazlett, and we are here to talk Challenges with David Weber and crew. David, let's start with you. Another anthology? What's going on? What Price Victory, I think, was the last one. So now we're on to Challenges.
Yes. Well, from the beginning, the anthologies have been filling in, if you will, in the universe. And I don't mean that they are filler material. What I mean is that they give us an opportunity to look at things that are subsumed into the canon, but haven't actually been shared with the reader as unfolding events. They're part of the history, part of the backstory of the novels, but they let us look at elements that we wouldn't otherwise look at. And in this instance, because Jane and I are doing the Star Kingdom novels, and Tim and Tom and I are doing the Manticore Ascendant novels, this particular anthology goes back to the very beginning of the Star Kingdom and lets you look at some of the, for want of a better term, seminal challenges that created the Star Kingdom's identity.
He actually finished the sentence.
Yeah, I'm surprised.
Okay.
Hey.
Make note of the time. We know the date. Make note of the time.
Timestamp at 0800 07 hours. Anyway.
I have been challenged by people who said that was not possible. They keep talking about a pizza somewhere. I have no idea what that is. I mean, you know.
Well, somebody's got to buy a pizza for somebody, apparently.
Yes,
now,
that's
so.
true.
I
Yes.
like it.
Okay, so when you're thinking about kind of filling in kind of these interstitials, you know, in terms of kind of what's missing, there's at the very beginning of the book in the introduction, you talk a little bit about dealing with continuity and continuity errors and things like that.
Yeah.
Really quick, because I'm sure it's actually there's people who'll be riveted on this topic in particular, so we might as well just head it off at the gate. Say a little bit more about that, how this book is kind of meant to handle some of those things and some of the choices that you may have had to make.
Well, let me answer your question and then let Jane talk about having to deal with it, especially in her story. She had the heavy lifting on that in this book. In the very first anthology, which is way back when, has nothing to do with this one, except that it was the first of the anthologies. We had two stories that were submitted by people who had not read any of the Honorverse, and they kind of hit some jarring notes, and so they are non-canonical. Okay. All the rest are intended to be canonical. It was always my intention to integrate good stories into the DNA of the series. When Linda did The Stray, it was very early in the developmental process of the anthologies in one way. And in another way, she was dealing with something that was established in the canon as background, but it hadn't been fully explored yet. And there were elements in it that were going to create problems that I didn't notice at the time. I didn't pay the amount of attention that I should have and that I'm trying to pay now. And I'm going to let Jane talk about what the specific elements that she was working on in this story were about. But what we are planning to do is, I hope that this was the most egregious story in terms of a really, really good story that we really, really want to keep in the canon, but that had continuity issues that we're working on. Jane, you want to talk about what we were doing there?
Sure. This dates back to when Weber and I were doing fire season. Weber sent me several documents to provide background, especially for the tree cats, how their society works, etc. It turned out he didn't bother to reread any of them in advance.
Hey.
Well, look,
Fired.
look, darling, that is, because you would have caught it. I want to say that one of the things that, in doing multiple novellas and novels with Weber is he's got a tremendous amount of material packed between his ears, but he doesn't know it's there until the right or wrong thing comes up. And then he's remarkably fantastic about providing a huge amount of information to fill in those gaps, which is why I know he didn't read the document Tree Cats for Annie that he sent me, or reread The Stray when he said, look at these, they'll give you good background on how to do tree cats. Because when I finished doing a lot of tree cat stuff in fire season, which is really the first novel that takes you backstage into tree cat's home life, Weber was like, what? No. And I'm like, it's in the material you sent me. So one of the things is that the tree cat's ability to understand humans in a verbal sense, in a sense of understanding words and things, is a lot more detailed in The Stray. And there are other aspects as well. They seem to have a whole lot more perception of what it is that these stranger two legs are. And so I followed that model as my boss told me to do. And what we ended up having to do a tremendous amount of redrafting. So when for challenges, Weber asked me if I would do a prequel to The Stray. I had the impression, maybe I'm incorrect on this, that he had a lot of people say, hey, in The Stray, we meet what is effectively the second tree cat adoptee and the second tree cat who adopts a human, but we've never seen what happened. We only see the very tragic end of their relationship. Would you do that story? And by then we'd done multiple books, so we just erased anything from Linda Evans' story that didn't fit tree cat continuity, tree cat human relationship continuity at that point in the history. And I wrote as if I was writing one of our novels. And I think it worked very well, at least for me.
And there's another thing that is specific to this story, but which has had kind of repercussions in the Star Kingdom novels, which is the horses.
Yes.
Because horses never adapt successfully to Sphinx. And I had that in here. And I was going to ask Jane exactly what I had a tremendous quantity of between my ears. But I knew that there weren't horses on Sphinx. I'd inserted that into a couple of places in the novel, and I had not had The Stray in mind when I was doing it. And so Jane and I have written an effort to introduce horses to Sphinx into the novels, and ultimately it will fail, but not for want of trying. And thereby I have cleaned up my mess in that respect with Jane's assistance.
Right. So we have horses in the stray, which meant I needed to keep them going in this particular story. But we insert a reference to the fact that they're still working on the modifications. And it's a bioengineering challenge that is ongoing.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's start discussing some of the stories at a high level. I'm going to go to Jane first, just to because we started talking about the story, and then I'll move to Marisa after that, just to try to get back to order. But so Deadly Delusions.
Yes.
Let's get into it. What was your inspiration behind that? In addition, not that it's inspiration to correct continuity errors, but that's kind of the functional purpose, it seems, at least partly of it.
It's a secondary purpose.
Yeah, secondary purpose,
Yeah.
correct. Right.
Well, two things were important to me when doing that story. If you've read The Stray, you know what happens to Arvin Earhart and his tree cat friend, and it's not very nice. They basically, sorry folks, cover your ears if you don't want a spoiler, but they both end up horribly dead and mutilated, and the tree cat gets the better death. Poor Arvin is a name and a mangled body. So I was determined that if I had to write a story about people who literally just a few months later would die horribly, I was going to make them real people, not just props, which is essentially what they are in The Stray. Well, Arvin in particular, not the tree cat, but Arvin in particular is just a prop. He's the reason that his tree cat companion goes above and beyond, and all sorts of things are discovered. So I was determined to make him a real person with real dimension. That was really important to me. Another thing that's really important to me, and it's a place where Weber and I haven't exactly headbutted, but we've had a lot of discussions, is I kind of get tired of the fact that tree cat adoptions almost always seem to end up with somebody horribly and tragically dead, dying and dead and mutilated, and having to be rescued from, I wanted to show the tree cats had a lot more dimension than just saving of utterly incompetent two legs. So I wanted to do a different sort of tree cat adoption thing to give the sense that in the future, where there are an awful lot of tree cat human pairings that are just off stage, that the reader would have the sense that they didn't all involve some, the hexapuma is about to shred the idiot girl, or whatever. Well, think about it. It happens in both Heart of Stone and A Beautiful Friendship. I could go on. So I wanted to do it. It was really important to me to do a different sort of adoption. And that was one of the things I structured the story around. Back to you.
And as you were writing, how did the story evolve? Like, what did you have a theme in mind before you wrote the story, or was it kind of emergent?
Can I throw something in here?
Absolutely.
Something that Jane introduced in this story that I had never thought of as being part of it. Okay, one of the things that we've been trying to touch on in especially the Star Kingdom novels is the trauma that everyone in the Star Kingdom has been through thanks to the plague and how they respond to it. And in Jane's case, we have a character who is very badly damaged by the circumstances of the plague and her experience of it, her reaction to it, that ties directly into the question of how tree cat adoptions happen. And I thought that was, it's not that it causes an adoption in this person's case. It's that the perspective the person has is shaped and changed by that trauma in a way that makes it an absolutely essential element of the story. And I really like the way that she brought that consequence of it forward and into the mix.
Yeah, and you ask about themes. I don't tend to sit down and say, hello, today my theme is. I'm strongly character driven. And so I was thinking about Arvin. I said to Weber, what about having some sort of threat to the facility? Then I had to work backwards from that to who would be silly enough to attempt to vandalize a authorized scientific facility, which took me backwards to a 20-something. And then Jeannie and her sister, who are the main characters for that particular angle, evolved. I used to teach college, and one thing I truly love about late teen, early 20 somethings is they are brilliant until they are not. You can have the same person who is highly put together on something that is their hobby, something that is their whatever. They'll talk to you like they'll be better than any expert. They may not know how to set up a bank account. So that came strongly into developing Jeannie, and it's all. I used to teach in college English, and I read a lot of 18 to 20 something essays that gave me a lot of window into that mindset. So those were the things. I'm character driven. And the story evolved from weaving those characters together to their ultimate encounter.
Now, did the characters ever, in this story or in prior stories, did they ever surprise you? You kind of had a plan for them, and they refused to cooperate, and then magic happened?
Yes, but that's why I like writing character-driven stories, because otherwise they're just pawns being slid around the field, and they're utterly boring, and I'm bored. And so, yeah, that's part of the delight for me.
And stepping back from character, in addition to many of the other things that this story endeavors to do, how would you say that it kind of moved or kind of added detail to the Honorverse in general?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that Weber talked about already for me is dealing with the consequences of the plague. When the plague is initially introduced, and I know Marisa will have a lot to say about this, but when the plague is introduced, it's effectively a good guy. It's the reason Stephanie and her family are able to move to a new planet, have a great big estate, be very important people from the get-go, even if they're not quite nobles. And when I started, and that's fine. When I started writing in that time period, though, and had people who had been adults and children who had seen, like Karl Zavanek, Stephanie's best friend, or it has seen basically half of his family. His parents have lost siblings, cousins, aunts, uncles. When in Friends Indeed, they get engaged, his mother says, go through the jewelry box, find a ring. I've got lots of jewelry from all the people who've died. So in Challenges, the story I wrote, Arvin had been effectively a first responder during the time that the plague was thinning the population of Stinks, and a lot of disasters happened. And he's essentially dealing with deep, unresolved post-traumatic stress, dishonor, and depression. And so it makes what he does in my story all the more heroic, because he steps forward and acts when his natural inclination at that point is to believe he can't do anything. Jeannie also is a child victim of the plague. Her family went into isolation. They were struggling to keep going, and they didn't have the time or the energy to notice that Jeannie had some serious problems. They're not bad people. They're not negligent parents. They're people with way, way too much on them. And so Jeannie is a damaged person who nobody has the time or energy to notice. So it adds a lot to the sense that, as Stephanie herself comes to realize as she gets to make more and more friends, the plague wasn't the good guy. The plague is something that was a huge, multi-level, multi-generational tragedy.
Is there anything else you'd like the audience to know about your story?
Just that it was really hard to write, because it's very hard to write a story knowing that the people you are living with, you're in their heads, are are fated to have a really horrible, disastrous ending. But I would like to think that maybe it will make Linda's story, which has some wonderful elements to it, even better rather than otherwise.
I think that it almost certainly will. The worst problem is going to be that my general recommendation to people is they read the books and the anthologies in publication order. And I really would like a lot of people to be reading Jane's story before they read Linda's, because of just what she said about what it does with Arvin.
Okay. Speaking of the plague, Marissa, speaking of brighter things.
Great
Yes.
handover. Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks.
yeah.
Yeah.
Much cheerier topic.
Yes. So this is a very cheerful story. It is not. So David said, "Hey, would you like to write a plague story?" And I said yes. And then I got into it and I was like, oh, oh. Uh, so I had a lot more fun writing it than the characters had living it, certainly. And it was also one of those things where there is established in history how the plague goes, how the vaccine goes, how the plague comes back, what happens. And so the moment in time I had was I feel like these days we're living in between big events like all the time. And that's kind of what was happening to the characters in this story. They were living big events, but also in the grand scheme of history, very much between big events. And so like Jane said, I very much started with the characters, because how do you live through these huge events and how do you take it personally or not? And that was a really fun thing to find out about Sophia. So Dr. Sophia Agbayani Reyes is my main character, and she is from Beowulf, which is very important to me for reasons. And she...
Well, you can't just let that go. Why is it reasons? You got to say the reasons.
No, that's the teaser.
Yeah, it's a teaser.
Okay.
Reasons. And she is brilliant. She's a brilliant scientist, and that matters. She also has a colleague from her grad school days who is a genius. And sometimes it's hard to be brilliant in the face of genius. And so that is a very small bit of the story, but definitely something that matters a lot to Sophia, because she takes what's happening on Manticore very, very personally, more than she expected to by far as the events of the story go. So.
Now they find themselves kind of transferred to a station initially, and there's some hesitancy kind of with the team lead. Can you talk through that dynamic a little bit?
Oh, Liesel. Yes. So whomst amongst us has not had a manager who is not super great at being a leader, but is really good at the bureaucracy. And Liesel is very, very good at certain parts of being a team leader. But in her defense, we'll say, when they leave Beowulf, it is not a plague. It is a disease. It is a problem. It is an interesting research opportunity. So the team, they're all volunteers. They're all going to help, because how interesting that something native has mutated to affect colonists. How very interesting. By the time they get there, because this is not a time of rapid travel, by the time they get there, it has changed. The situation has changed dramatically. Liesel did not sign up for this. Liesel signed up for an interesting research opportunity, and she got a plague. And so she immediately is like, well, we could go home. We could stay on this station. They're already sending other people. It's going to be fine. This isn't really our problem. And that's Sophia's first moment of, but it is our problem. We're the ones who are here. And I love stories where it's not a chosen one. I'm the one who's here. So what am I going to do about it? And that is very much Sophia's perspective. And also turns out being of service really instilled upon Manticore from early days. So she gets along very well with a lot of the people she interacts with on Manticore.
And there's a lot that happens in this story, as there's kind of this escalation, right?
Mm-hmm.
How did you think through that and how to portray that in the story?
So step one, Tom Pope is a genius. I'd just like to put that out there. So he made the timeline work. And he was an amazing thought partner all the way through. So I knew that I wanted these like memos to Liesel to be kind of a framing situation through. I knew we had a great deal of time to go through. And Tom was an incredible resource, as David always is also. I'm just going to give Tom all his flowers right now, though. So Tom was willing to talk through like, okay, well, but remember there's this implication or this has to happen, or the story was 90% done. And we were like, just kidding. The timeline says, because what we didn't want to do is introduce new continuity issues in this anthology after Jane worked so hard to solve some. So we had to go back in and change Gregory's role, his sister's role, and some of the events that happened along the way. So the escalation is start with Tom and get a really good solid view of the timeline and then talk through those implications with somebody really smart. And then Sophia's brilliance kind of carried me through the rest. They always say, don't write a character smarter than you, but it worked in this case. So Sophia's definitely smarter than I am when it comes to curing viruses or trying to develop vaccines. And so it really was like, okay, and then what happens? Okay, but nothing good happens during this time, right? Like this is not a time of long-lived successes. And so it was, where can we build in human moments? So at the end of it, you're not just like, oh my God, how do we go on? So,
well, one of the things that has been my approach to the anthologies from the beginning is that, if I say to somebody, what story would you like to write? Or I would like you to do this one, think about it, and they go away and then they come back and they say, this is what I'd like to do. And at that point, I'm looking for, okay, where can we slot this story in the established timeline? Where does it fit? And what specific information do they need that they may not have in terms of background? And I have to say that Tom is actually better in a whole bunch of ways of thinking through the basic platform of the background that they're going to need that they don't already have. And then as our well, I'll lay it off on him now so we can blame everything else that happens after this on him. He is
that's
our
not the point of that.
Yes, he is our official continuity editor now. Okay, congratulations, Tom. No good deed goes unpunished.
Thanks, David.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
One
What
of
are
the
friends for?
one of the challenges we had, Marisa and I had, is that we're going through these, going through the timeline, and I found out that there was like 4 timelines, for mutually, mutually antagonistic timelines. In fact,
That's a great way to say it.
And we and one of the problems I found was that 2 of them were in House of Steel, which was the place we should have fixed this stuff. But we, both David and I missed it. We had with the plague, we had basically one timeline in one place, one timeline in another. You can kind of squint and fit them together. But we had to do a lot more than squint to make this work, as we were actually trying to live in it. And so there are some changes to dates, nothing really drastic. I have a list of changes I need to make to some reprinting of House of Steel at some point. And so I know now what the official timeline of the plague is, but it makes a couple of modifications to what's seen in other books, but nothing really drastic.
And it's a plague time, right? Record keeping, not always,
That's right.
not always top priority when a large portion of
Sorry.
your population is dying. It's fine.
Yeah. Good move. Good move, Marisa. That works. That works.
Yeah, as I was reading this particular story, it's almost like if you've all seen the South Park episode where they go to invest money during the financial crisis and they're like, it's gone, right? I felt like here's a new character and they're gone.
Hey. Okay, I have been accused of that in the past. I will admit. I can't remember who it was who said this was actually it was one of the editors at Avon on the novel Insurrection that
Mm.
Steve White and I submitted to them initially before Bane. And she said, if he kills another person while I'm in their head, I'm going to scream, you know. And I'm like, but I like to write about characters. And they're like, yeah, you know, and I said, well, I have to make room for new ones, you know. And they're like, no, 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 no. But I think that, like Jane said, like Marisa has said, I think everyone involved in this particular anthology um, sees characters first and infrastructure second in terms of what's important to them as storytellers. That we have to worry about the infrastructure because we're working on the weak spots in it, but it's the characters and what they face, what they have to deal with, that really appeals to us in working our way through. Um, and it is in something like the plague or something like a war that you can actually get very clear penetration into something that's very complex in terms of the decisions that people make defining them, and by their decisions you will know them, if you know what I'm saying. And I think that that is a strong factor in all of the stories here. Now, Jacob's story is more of a formative experience for a formidable character, but I'm sure he'll have something to say about that when we get there.
Yeah, I mean, the stakes mattered, right? It's a plague. If everybody you're following lives through it,
Mm-hmm.
did it really wipe out that large of a population? I mean, it wiped out a huge part of the population.
Yeah.
They couldn't come out unscathed.
In many ways, this time period in the Star Kingdom and the challenges that face it are much darker than anything that it faces when it's up against the People's Republic. Because you are looking here at what you're looking at here is the fragility of the Star Kingdom, even in a system that has a binary system that has three potentially habitable planets for humans. The fragility of this effort to claim those worlds. Um, and I think that it's also an opportunity to really look at. I used to my favorite analogy for the Star Kingdom before the discovery of the wormhole junction is it was Denmark, this quiet little place that everybody passed by, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is sort of the grim, bloody days of founding Denmark
Mm.
in a lot of ways for this the Honorverse in general, and you need to be able to do it in a way that partakes of the darkness that these people are dealing, but also partakes of the beacons out there in the darkness, which are characters facing up to that bleakness. And they are shaped by it. They are, in many ways, defined by it. But in the end, they make their own decisions about what they're going to do in the face of it.
And the other thing I found interesting about this particular story, Marisa, is like just whole branches of families just wiped out. I thought it did a really good kind of penetration of that. If you want to say a little bit more about that, I thought it was just because it's so stark and it's so fast
And that
that it
was
can happen.
entirely Marisa's input to it too. I did not even suggest to her that she do this, but I think it was very effective.
Thanks. This, I mean, there were original families that went that couldn't possibly have made it out. So I did do a fair amount of research because again, Sophia is smarter than me when it comes to science. So I did a lot of like, how do vaccines get created? And as you may imagine, in the year 2024, it's really hard to find impartial information about that.
Yeah, careful. We got to be very
Yeah, no, that's it.
careful on
That's
this
it. It
topic.
just, it was just hard to find impartial information on the actual development of things. I had to do a lot of digging. This wasn't the like grand old days of the early 2000s on the internet where it's like, do you want to watch this cool movie that we made about it? You know, so that was tricksy. And so while I was in there, I did a lot more research of things like the Spanish flu, And it had been a while since I had looked at things like the Spanish flu for good reason. But that is something where just entire families are gone, entire towns are gone, entire paths of possible future human stories were gone. And that really mattered to me. And I genuinely don't remember if this was Tom's idea or my idea. But there's a particular institution on Manticore that there wasn't anything about where its name came from. And I was able to work that into the story in a way that made me excited. And was actually called out by somebody who read the early story, was like, now I know how this happened. And that's fun, because it's fun to get to do that, of like, whose legacy are we still going to try to preserve when things go horribly, horribly wrong? And I got to work in a real story of a doctor who was studying the most venomous snakes, and he got bit by one, and there was no anti-venom. Part of his work was developing anti-venoms, and he knew that there was no world in which he was going to survive it. And so he didn't tell anybody. He didn't make a big deal about it, but he documented almost until his last moment every single symptom, every single thing he noticed, every single thing, knowing that it would help the scientists who came after him develop an anti-venom. And that is something too, in the couple of actual like medical researchers that I've talked to, like, let us be the last ones who ever have to deal with this disease, this virus, this loss. And it was very clear in the story of this herpetologist. And so I really wanted to work that in with Sophia too, of like, let no one else have to deal with this. Let us do whatever it takes. So like David said, by our decisions, let us be known. Let this be the end of this.
And then there's, go ahead, David.
I had not read the book I'm going to talk about just for a minute here when I was first establishing the Star Kingdom. But a few years later, I came across a book called, I believe it's The Great Influenza Epidemic. And it is the story of the 1918 flu. And the author begins it with Johns Hopkins establishment, like 30 years, 40 years before that, because he makes the point that in this story, it was the first time that medical science, as opposed to holistic medicine and so forth, went up against a pandemic, and medical science got its ass kicked. If the death rate from COVID had been remotely the same as that from 1918, it would have depopulated the continent of North America. That's how horrible the 1918 flu epidemic was. And what we're looking at here is something that in many ways is even worse, because you're having that kind of a death rate on a planet that doesn't have the population depth to accept it. At one point in the 1918, they were using steam shovels to dig mass graves outside Philadelphia because of the death rate, how quickly people were dying and so forth. And folks looking back from the perspective of the 21st century are going to be, how could that be possible? Especially after how we responded to COVID, and you know, what did somebody looking at something orders of magnitude worse than that, you know, how did they deal with it? How did they cope with it? And that has carried over into a lot of how I am now visualizing the effects of the plague on Manticore. And it will also, by the way, explain why mantis in general are going to have a very dim view of anybody who wants to introduce a biological weapon. Okay, I mean, it's not going to go well for whoever does it. Not that I'm saying anything like that could be coming. I mean, you know, I'm just throwing it out there.
And Marisa, I had a quick question. I don't know if you remember the name, but what was the hepatologist's name? Because I don't think it was mentioned in the story.
No, it wasn't mentioned in the story. I can pull it up. I will pull it up before the end of this. But it's a really good story. And I did make sure to be sure it was not apocryphal and it was an actual real thing that happened, and it was, but I will find him.
And then you also had a shout out to Semmelweis, I think. Which wasn't he, correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't he the doctor who was introduced basically sanitation into medical procedures, and he would ask people to wash their hands and all that good stuff. And like, because women kept dying in childbirth because nobody was washing their hands. And he basically went crazy because no one would listen to him.
Just
Is that the same
discussions.
guy?
I don't remember.
He-
I think so.
Well, the historical Semmelweis did.
Yeah,
Okay, but
yeah.
Yeah,
That's a great
yeah,
question.
yeah.
Yeah, no, same. Yes, yes. I'm trying to remember all the little like Easter eggs I put in because you do all this research for like a
Yeah,
line,
you had a lot of
right?
Easter eggs. That's what
I
I'm trying to
did.
point out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was
To
like, I
make
did
you
a lot of
think.
research, you guys. This is real. Yes. So, yes.
All right. Well,
And
we could
yeah,
probably just look that up. Look that up.
yeah.
too.
I'm gonna look up the herpetologist while we talk. But we have a long history of people doing really gross things in medicine that pushes the field forward, and just really like awful, horrible things. And then we also have people doing really noble, amazing things. And sometimes those noble, amazing people get driven stark raving mad because human bodies and minds are real complicated. So, but
And then in terms of this story, again, the theme question, were there any emergent themes that you saw or wanted to get across as you were writing these characters and what they went through?
yeah, I mean, I am that person who in high school I was like, I don't care why the curtains are blue. They're just blue. So like it's not it's not real
Right.
deep there. But I will say something that is big in just about everything I write is that power of collaboration. Sophia couldn't have done this alone. It was about her and her team. Not Liesel, but everybody else
Well,
working really hard.
Even Liesel, like
She
she
did
could
something.
have,
Mhm.
yeah, I don't want to give away anything, but
Yeah.
even at the end,
Yeah.
she behaved with some semblance of honor.
hmm So, and that is also important to me. Like at root, I feel like most people are basically good. Liesel was not actively trying to be a jerk the whole time, right? Like she genuinely signed up to help. She did not sign up for a plague. She did not sign up to die for some other planet. That is not what she was there for. And spoiler, she doesn't. Liesel doesn't die. Hooray! She was completely correct, and she kept herself safe, and she survives. But at heart, even when people act selfishly, that doesn't necessarily mean they're bad people. And so throughout that whole story, it was important to me that it wasn't like the plague made people terrible, because it didn't. And really it was that power of you can't do everything alone, and when you try to, it's not going to be successful. And I like academic rival stories, but I also like you're really smart people. Could you just work together and get to an answer? And that is what happens with Owen and Sophia. Other things happen with Owen and Sophia that were a little bit of a surprise to me. To Jane's point, sometimes your characters just do things, and you go with it. And then people you ask to read the story to make sure it works ask you to add more scenes, which happened to me 3 times, and 2 times I said yes. Yeah, so that piece of collaboration, I would say, is probably the big theme, is like the power of what people can do when they actually work together.
I think what you said to me was yes, comma, damn it.
yes.
I was so mad at Tom.
Yes.
Because so my friend Melissa Olthoff, also a Bain author, she's like, oh my gosh, could you write a scene like this? And I was like, no, yes. It was immediately in my head. I already knew. So I added it. And then I sent it to Tom and I was like, you can say no to this additional scene. It's not super necessary. He was like, no, this is great. We're keeping this. And then I don't know, maybe a couple days later, he's like, also though, was thinking we might need, as we fix the timeline, like we might need this scene. And I was like, you suck.
Damn it.
You are
Yes.
so correct. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
absolutely yes, comma, I think all caps, damn it. And then it was such a good scene. So mystery to people who have not yet read it, but those 2 scenes were really, really critical, I think, to building the flow of the story.
Well, and another thing that I like to, okay, let's face it. There are a lot more, quote, ordinary people in the world than there are extraordinary people in the world.
Mhm.
But one of the things that Marisa is doing in this story is something that a lot of people don't seem to notice necessarily about Honor Harrington herself. And that is that, yes, Honor is all these, strong-willed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what she really accomplishes best of all is motivating the people around her to accomplish things that she could never have accomplished on her own. She can get them to give 110%. That is what Bernard Montgomery defined as the star quality in a military commander, is that ability to inspire, to carry, and then to be able to stand back out of the way and let people do what they're doing. And that is a lot of what we see in Marisa's story here, is the syntheses that is created when these people strike sparks off each other and they look for different ways. But they're motivated primarily by the leadership of someone who doesn't think that she's special. And I think that's one of the things that makes this story work as well as it is. She is special in a very, very special way, but she doesn't really see that. She sees herself as doing what, of course, she should be doing, even while she is putting herself in the face of death that she didn't have to face. And as Marisa says, none of them signed up to face when they headed out to Beowulf as observers.
Oh, my Sophia.
Any?
Sorry, the
Yes.
herpetologist is Carl Patterson Schmidt. He was an American
Okay.
herpetologist. And it was a boom slang, which I did not remember. So, yikes. That was not a fun death.
I would not have been messing around with those. I said,
Mm-mm,
here,
mm-mm.
Honor, mess around with this,
Yeah,
and
this
then seeing
crazy
what
stuff.
happened. I mean, you know.
Yeah, maybe. Bad times.
David, if I can jump in here for a second.
Yeah.
George Patton had one of his dicta was, don't tell people how to do something. Tell them what needs to be done, and they'll amaze you with their ingenuity.
Yeah.
And of course, Patton saw him, even he was the ultimate prima donna, so he saw himself as someone special. But at the same time, he realized that the best way to get the kind of results out of people that he wanted was to let them do their job and be exceptional at doing that job, and maybe they'll come up with something totally unimagined at some point. But it was that idea of inspiring, which we were talking about with Honor, that characteristic that she has, that she inspires her subordinates and the people around her to accomplish more, to give the 110%, just by example, by encouragement, by pointing them in the right direction, and letting them, and then getting out of the way and let them do their work. So,
I have a friend. Well, I had a friend. I lost him some years ago, but he was a retired brigadier general who was drafted for the Korean War and stayed in. But he told me that his favorite scene of all in On Basilisk Station is where Rafe has screwed up the deployment of the satellites, and Honor immediately sees what needs to be done to fix it. But he obviously hasn't yet. And he's this shiny new, like junior grade lieutenant. And she looks at him and she says, the deployment pattern was your responsibility, Mr. Cardonas. Fix it. And that's all she says to him. And he said, absolutely, that was his favorite moment in that entire novel, was her turning it into a growth moment, if you will, for Rafe Cardonas, not just as an officer, but as an individual.
I know we have 2 more stories to discuss.
Yes, that's true.
But I want to note that one of the things that Weber and I have done with the Stephanie Harrington novels is do the exact opposite character in Stephanie. Stephanie is smart, knows she's smart, and has to grow up from believing that the rest of the world simply needs her to boss them around to be in order. And so it, to Weber's credit, he doesn't, even though that's the pattern he likes, we've made Stephanie a very different person. She starts at age 11. But I think it's a very good thing for a series overall to have different sorts of people and their growth arcs. And then I'll shut up.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Marisa, any final things you want to talk about regarding your story for the audience?
I promise it ends hopefully. So.
Well, there is a little bit of a spoiler in that we know the Star Kingdom survived.
Right.
Okay.
Everything
But we
is
don't
fine.
know who survived, and given the death toll, the answer is not a whole bunch.
Yeah. I will tell you that the very first Crown Prince of Manticore, Gregory, I loved him desperately. I did not
Yes.
expect to.
Yes.
But he made my whole heart happy. So I hope you
Yes.
enjoy meeting him.
I did indeed.
Well, I think the great Comrade Stalin probably sums this one up. A single death is a tragedy. A million deaths is a statistic.
Oof.
In terms of emotional impact, I think that's very true. That wasn't exactly the way he had
Right.
it in mind, though.
No. This is not a comrade story, guys. Collaboration, not comrade in that way.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. That's right.
Yes. If it hadn't been for Dan, we wouldn't have had any exploding starships in this anthology at all. Not a one.
And now, as promised, one jump ahead. John Moore is a nanotech-enhanced soldier of fortune. Lobo is an AI, a living weapons and intelligence platform of enormous destructive potential. Two very dangerous wolves in a galaxy of deadly corporate and paramilitary predators. But Moore has grown weary of the killing, and just once he'd like to finish a job without leaving a trail of blood behind him. Not going to happen. Not on a pristine planet called Macon, where two gigantic corporations vie for control of the local jump gate and access to the riches of an undeveloped world. Dealing with a kidnapping and extortion scheme is only the beginning for Moore and Lobo as they work to stay one jump ahead.
If he lives at his office, as I now assume, then we'll confirm that tonight and start searching for an acceptable way to take him there. I settled into the launch couch. Once we were in orbit, I'd do some exercises and work out the kinks of the day's surveillance. Take us up and put us in a reasonably crowded geosync orbit, I said. Thank you for telling me the plan this time, Lobo said. Having even that little bit of information is so much better than sitting alone in a storage shed. Only the barely sentient loaders for company. Have I mentioned? I tuned out Lobo's chatter as best I could. It was going to be a long night. By morning, I'd persuaded Lobo to forgive me, or at least to stop badgering me. Osterlad hadn't left his headquarters all night, so the odds were good that he did indeed live there. Over the next day and a half, he did nothing to change that belief, leaving the building only once for another lunch at a restaurant a few more clicks down the coast from the first. I filled the time with reading, exercising, watching samples of the local entertainment broadcasts, heavy this season on mysteries of the jump gate masters and conspiracy theory semi-reality offerings in which crackpots elevated to temporary deity status explained how the entire web of space-time was a plot to force us all to consume processed artificial dairy products, and trying not to obsess over what would happen when Johns failed to check in and Osterlad took the offensive. The first break in Osterlad's routine came midway through the afternoon of what had until then been an unpromising day. He exited with the usual portal of guards, but this time he was dressed casually, in shorts and a loose shirt, and no cars were waiting. He walked quickly to the VTOL and climbed in. As soon as he was settled, the pilot headed the craft out over the ocean, about 3 kilometers offshore. The cliff-built corporate structures too far away to see from ocean level in the gently rolling waters. The VTOL touched down on a ship I assumed was Osterlad's sailboat. 4 guards and a pair of young women greeted him. the former staying back and each of the latter working hard to earn his attention. The ship was enormous, bigger than anything I'd ever seen with sails, a bit over 150 meters in length and about a third that wide at its broadest point, with 3 enormous masts sporting sails, each of which could completely cover Lobo. The boat rode the water with the effortless grace of seabirds easing up thermals on a breezy day. At first I thought Osterlad had constructed the vessel of the same active camo material as Lobo, but upon closer inspection, I realized what Lobo's scans confirmed. It was composed of timbers from native sadwood trees, buffed to the deep blue of the water around it. I was surprised at the lack of antennas or other visible electronics until Lobo's broadcast scans traced their outlines in the masts and the upper hull of the ship. I'd never seen a lovelier boat, and for a few minutes I enjoyed the images of it in Lobo's monitors as Osterlad took a slow tour of the deck, chatting with various crew members and pausing occasionally to appreciate the view. The wood construction was a break because it offered little protection from Lobo's deep scans. I counted 8 crew members in sight, plus Osterlad, the guards, and the girls. Lobo found no traces of any other people on board, so unless the ship had specially shielded sections, the opposition count was 15. I had to assume most of the crew members also doubled as bodyguards, because the craft could certainly sail itself. The body count was higher than I would have liked, but though this group constituted a larger force than the normal guard team, it was also one far more isolated than anything we'd face on shore. Some collateral damage was likely. The girls moved more like providers than protectors. But on balance, the situation was far better than the one at the restaurant. The VTOL helped us by taking up a guard position a couple hundred meters behind and above the ship, farther back than its land station, probably so it didn't mess up the sailing or Osterlad's view in any direction. Osterlad finished his tour of the deck at the center of the boat, where he took the helm, a classic big-spoked wheel that perched in the middle of a console bristling with displays for the processors that did the real work. He headed the ship out to sea. The guards and crew busied themselves at discreet distances from Osterlad, and the girls stayed close, but not so close that they'd interfere with his control of the vessel. Lobo's aerial view showed the 7 people arranged in a V with Osterlad at its point. I gave the guards credit for making the formation look effortless and natural. Time was running out. This was the best chance at him we'd seen. "Let's take him now," I said to Lobo. "Destroy or capture?" he asked. "Capture," I said. "I need information. What do you have that can take out the crew?" "Both energy and projectile weapons, of course," Lobo said. "If I come in behind the VTOL in my tourist shuttle guise, I can shoot it down, remove the ship's crew, and leave Osterlad for you." "I don't want to kill anyone if I can avoid it," I said. "That would be a tactical error."
This has been the Bane Free Radio Hour. Thanks for joining us at the heart of science fiction. Join us next week for the second half of the interview of the authors of Challenges. And later, we continue with part 34 of One Jump Ahead by Mark L. Van Name. Score by Ruth Judkowitz.